Hey everybody, welcome to episode 107 of the Hard Truth About B2B e-commerce. I'm Timothy Peterson, and I'm without Isaiah Bollinger today. Isaiah is not feeling particularly well. I hope by the next episode he is feeling great. And I'm sure he's exhausted from our first ever live version of the podcast. We did that last week at Digital Commerce Today in Boston. We did an interview live at the conference, had a great time. And well, I wish you the best, Isaiah. I hope you feel really great soon. A couple other quick things. I want to just give a few shout outs, as is our tradition. I'm picking two people in particular because it's their birthday today, both of them, which is just very funny. One is Luke Matthews, who's out on LinkedIn all the time, and I always tell him to listen to the podcast, and he says that he has, or so Luke, I'm going to give this one to you, and I'm going to tell you which episode the shout out is in. Happy birthday today. And Liam Darmody, if folks know Liam, he works in branding. Also want to give him a shout out for his birthday today, which is just amazing. And we have many, many, many other regular listeners. I just give you a big thank you for everywhere you're listening right now. I'll just tell you this, Nate, because if you don't know, we've discovered we have listeners in Australia and New Zealand, Hong Kong, mainland China, Vietnam, Philippines, all over Europe, parts of North Africa. We're thrilled that we actually, at this point, have listeners in these pockets all around the world. It's great. So thank you, wonderful listeners. I'm going to pause just for a moment to make sure that we can insert our sponsor mentions. Thank you in advance to our sponsor, and then I will introduce our guest. Balance is a B2B e-commerce payment solution that works well for you and for your buyers. It offers a seamless one-click checkout for almost any payment method, including ACH, wire, checks, cards, even terms. It's used by leaders in B2B e-commerce, and it's as easy as buying a shirt from Amazon. Check them out at getbalance.com. Book a session and tell them what your needs are. They are the first dedicated payment platform for B2B e-commerce, 100% tailored to your needs. Thanks again to our sponsor, Balance. Nate Obray, thank you for being our guest in episode 107. Tell all our listeners what you do and what your career is like how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. So I originally started out, I studied computer science, and strangely, I ended up originally in I was a partner in a marketing firm. And then one of our clients there ended up hiring me, and they were a consumer's good company. And I worked there for 10 years prior to doing what I'm doing now. And that's where I got most of my experience. We sold mattresses and basically anything that went on a bed. So we sold, mostly boxed mattresses. So we sold those, and then we sold bed bases, sheets, pillows, and mattress protectors, and anything with the bed. And when I started working for the company, I was employee maybe 15. I was their first full-time software person, and originally got hired to build their websites and that kind of a thing. And over time, that slowly morphed into, we ended up building most of their software internally. So we built their websites, but then we also built an inventory management system, and we built their CRM, and we built basically the system that would collect payments and send out invoices and the whole 9 yards, basically. And that included a scanning system. So we implemented scanners in their warehouse, and we did, bins, the whole 9 yards. We integrated with the all of our shipping carriers,
Mm-hmm.
did all that kind of stuff. And basically spent the next 10 years scaling that company up from probably, I don't know exactly, but probably $30 to $50 million company all the way up to about $1 billion. So we went through enormous growing pains. When I left, there were over 1,500 employees. So it was a massive learning experience, basically.
So as
And
employee 15, were you a part owner of this company as well? Because that's quite a ride.
no, I was not. It was owned by one person, basically. Well, him and his wife, kind of a family-owned thing. But I was not an owner. I just worked with them for those 10 years and just grew it. And as you can imagine, it was quite the ride. Trying to build the software for a company that grows that big it's challenge in its own right. So
oh, sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off. I had a question.
no, you're good. Yeah, go ahead with your question.
Sure. So you say build the software. So how much of what you did was quote unquote from scratch versus, like, how people will get like a big commerce platform today or a Shopify platform and then maybe adapt it or have various integrations. What did you do that was just, one-off, unique?
I mean, pretty much the whole thing was unique. We didn't build sites on Shopify. We built them ourselves. Our language was PHP, and we used our own proprietary framework. And we used JavaScript, CSS, and HTML for the front end. Later on, we adopted Vue.js. So, I mean, we didn't use a lot of platforms. We kind of built things ourselves from the ground up, which has its advantages and its disadvantages. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that businesses go out and do that. We had, it was just me to begin with, but at its peak, we had 40 software developers. So we had a pretty large team.
You answered my second question. You answered my second question. So I was going to say it wasn't just you doing all of this, because that's impossible.
No. Yeah, we had a pretty large team. And like I say, I'm not necessarily saying that every business should go out and hire a software development team. Obviously, that could be very expensive because software developers aren't also your cheapest employees. But this was an investment the owner decided that he wanted to make. And, like I say, there are some advantages to doing it this way. Because you end up with
tell us some of the advantages. I think that's and then we can go through the disadvantages as well. I think our listeners will like to hear that.
Yeah. So the advantages are you just build internally an enormous amount of internal capability. So there, I could give a few examples of challenges that we faced. Like one was we would go to these trade shows and we would have a pretty big setup at trade shows. But as you know, you go to these trade shows, and especially like it's gotten better, but I would say, 5 years ago, during a massive trade show, it's almost impossible to have internet in your booth.
That's true.
Like just didn't work. And but our goal was we wanted to, when we would sign on a new customer and they would put in their first order, that by the time they got home from that trade show, their product would be at their store already. And that was kind of our mission. And so to do that, we needed to collect their information. We needed to create their customer account. And then we also needed to put the order into the system. And we had to do that basically without internet. So as a software development team, it's like, well, there are solutions to that. We just had to figure them out and build it. So we built kind of a local setup that would store the information, and then we would actually run it over to our hotel and
on a flash drive, or like,
well, it was actually just on a computer, and we would hook it up to the internet over a VPN to try to make it secure, and then we would sync it up, and we'd do that a couple times a day, and our team would get the new customer accounts and the orders, and and then as time went on, that just got more and more advanced, where we figured out how to finally get reliable internet in the booth. But even then, it's like our solution, it was pretty advanced. We integrated with the hosts of the trade show so that we could scan the badges. We would know stuff about their company from that badge scan. That would actually go onto a queue, and our sales reps who were wandering the floor, our trade shows were generally pretty busy, but they would see basically a list of people that were waiting, and they could select them, and then they would already know things about them. We would know if they were an existing account because we could match them up against our database. We'd know if they were a new customer that we hadn't dealt with before, and kind of some of their background.
So you hadn't even built so you didn't even use like an existing CRM, like a HubSpot or something. You just built all that. So what? So yeah. I'm going to let you continue on this, but I have to ask this question. Why wouldn't you just say, well, we'll use HubSpot and then integrate it? Because it's easy. HubSpot's easy, all right? So why build that from scratch, something like that?
Well, a lot of it's because we had already done so much of that. So like the way it's not like we just went out and decided one day that we're going to build everything from scratch. It really was more like, well, we built the websites initially. That was the first thing I did when I started, and I centralized everything. We had multiple websites, and instead of building individual websites and listing products on individual websites, I actually just built kind of a back end that stored all the main information, and those websites would just pull from that. So, and then when we get an order on those websites, it'd go into that one central spot. Customer information would go to that one central spot. So we had this, and it was working really well. So then we started tacking on kind of our business to business side of things, where we would sell to, our mom paws all the way to, chain stores. And so it just kind of evolved basically, and it worked. I think that the reality is this: it just worked really well for us, and just having the power and the flexibility of being able to customize it to do whatever challenge happened to be in the moment. It just kind of, I mean, to some extent, for lack of a better way of describing, it just happened that way.
No, that's often the way a lot of businesses are. That's totally legit. I get that.
Yeah. I mean, I think if we had gotten to a point and it hadn't worked, we would have looked, or we ran into problems, we would have looked for a more off-the-shelf solution. And we did start out with some off-the-shelf solutions, but we encountered problems, and it was easy to overcome those with our I mean, the reality is we were fortunate that we had some really talented software developers in our area, and they wanted to work at this company. And so, I mean, it's kind of one of those things where that's why I say I'm not necessarily saying every company should go hire a development team and build custom software. It can be very expensive, and it can be very time consuming. And there's varying degrees of talent within the development community, and finding the right person that is ambitious enough to try to take something like this on, I think isn't going to be an easy task per se. So I'm not necessarily recommending it, but it's more, that's what happened. That's what we did. And that's where I got a lot of my experience.
So I think there are so many thoughts that come to mind from your descriptions here. I mean, one is that, in a sense, you're like a pioneer of composable commerce, headless and all that, right? I mean, because really, what were you doing, right? I mean, you're doing what people now call, composable commerce. I mean, and that's, so you should call yourself the inventor of it. And like make a huge splash saying that you created this, however many years ago for this company.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's one, that's one thought. And the other, another thing that just really comes to mind here is that, it's kind of the old phrase, and my grandmother used to say this too: work with what you got, right?
Yeah.
You if you have talent in you and in the team, then why go outside that, right? For at first, right? If you don't have
Yep.
that, if it's just me sitting in a room alone, maybe I have to launch something on Shopify at first, right? And maybe that's what
Yep.
I need to do because I have no other option. But
Absolutely.
this is it's a great lesson in a way to say, go with it.
Yeah.
Just go with it.
And the reality is, I mean, it's not like we didn't have internal discussions about building versus buying. And there were certainly people within the company that felt that we should go buy existing solutions, that felt maybe we didn't necessarily have the expertise to do these things, especially, I mean, it happened at every stage of the company. People would always question whether or not our team was talented enough to build kind of for the next phase of the business. And I always felt that we were more than capable of doing it because I felt like we had a very talented group of people there. And so, it's not like we were just always out building stuff. There was definitely internal discussion about it.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time, the truth is the way that my team would kind of win those arguments to some extent, for lack of a better way of putting it. They would say, well, we need to do X. I'm not sure you guys can do X. So we would just go prototype X.
Oh.
And they'd be like, oh, you guys did that? And it's like, yeah, we can do it. We can do this. And then they off to the races we would go. And but that requires a certain level of ambition that not everybody has. And we were taking some risks that we would, I would often, especially when we were small, stay up all night to build some prototype because I wanted to prove that, hey, we can do this. We can do this. So it's not like it was, there was definitely a lot of internal discussion, and we had to kind of prove ourselves every step of the way that we were kind of equal to the task at hand. And so I don't want to present the picture that we just kind of rolled with it all the time. I mean, there are definitely a lot of reasons. Like, we could talk about some of the disadvantages. One is that
Yeah, I was gonna get to that. There you go. Now, ready.
yeah,
What's
yeah.
the
I mean,
downside? What's the downside?
the downside is you are relying on your internal expertise,
Mm-hmm.
and like, no one group of people has expertise of it. Like a HubSpot, they've served who knows how many companies. They really are experts in kind of the CRM type space, and and so, like, they're going to have insights that your team may not necessarily have, if
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense. Because you have a limited group of people that have a more limited, usually, set of experience, if that makes sense.
Sure, it does.
So it's like, yeah, it's like arriving at the proper solution quickly can be a real challenge. And we tried. I mean, my approach was often kind of the principles first thing. Well, let's just look at the problem and let's just solve the problem. Let's not worry too much what everybody else is doing at the moment. Let's just focus on that first, give it our go,
Mm-hmm.
come up with a prototype, the solution, kind of just figure out what's going to solve the problem. And then we'd go look around and say, well, what's so-and-so doing and what's so-and-so doing? A lot of times that would just validate our solution that we'd come up with. And other times it'd be like, oh, yeah, I'm glad we looked, because we need to probably adjust what we're going to do to be more in line with some of these other solutions that are out there. So, I mean, that's a big disadvantage, is just, like, you are limited in your expertise. And sometimes these companies really do have, some best in class solutions out there that you could learn from. And then, obviously there's just the disadvantage of it's not less expensive.
Mhm.
And there's also, it takes time to develop software.
Sure.
So there has to be a certain level of patience. I mean, I think it's the gap between buying software and building it isn't as big as some people think it is. It can be, and a lot of that's going to depend on your development team and what the tools that they choose to use and what their capabilities are. But a lot of times when you go and you implement a CRM in a large company, it could take a year to get that thing up and running
Mhm.
smoothly and get it all in place. And a lot of times we can develop large chunks of that software in that same amount of time. And if what we do is, instead of building a generalized solution that these other companies have, we just build one that is razor focused on what our company's needs are, oftentimes we can deliver that value much faster,
Yeah,
especially with a seasoned team.
yeah, and I think you're bringing up another topic I wanted to kind of weave in here is that, a lot of it, I'm in the position of being a consultant at this point in my career. I've done VP of e-commerce and VP of marketing and all these roles, and now I kind of consult a lot with a lot of businesses, B2B and B2C. And sometimes, we're sitting in the room and how do you do these calculations? How do you have these conversations? Like, what are we going to do in-house? What are we bringing in? And what's interesting is that, it's never simple. Like I remember going into a business, and for the sake of, bringing this up for our listeners, you mentioned like 40 40 software people, right? At
Yep.
the end, yeah. So 40, what they would do in their formula is they would say 40 times average salary of 100,000 is 4 million a year. And let's see, it's less than 4 million a year to get this package or whatever. Or
Yep.
it was such an oversimplified view of things because, of course, those people are not just sitting there only doing this one
Yep.
thing, bringing in the new platform, right? Or
Yep.
whatever. Or they're doing so many other things over the course of the year for everybody. And they're also, as you said, laser focused. That's a
Yep.
key component here. It's a very different kind of mindset that people have to have instead of like 40 times 100,000. Oh, wait, it's more. So I'll go here and do this.
Yep. Well, kind of the advantage is like, uh, let's say some problem crops up in your company, and you don't know what the problem is going to be in advance. Something crops up, and if you buy a solution, the solution solves its set of problems, and it will do so really, really well. But imagine having a team of talented software developers that you could say, hey, like let's brainstorm solutions to this problem that we have. And your team, we can help come up with a part of that solution, a software component that maybe is going to aid. Usually, software by itself isn't going to solve everyone's problems. It's usually going to, it's something that's going to, it's something that's going to help with scale. It's something that's going to, amplify the effects that something might have, a solution might have. So, just being able if you have a team at your disposal, not just the solution, you can point that team at a whole new problem,
Mhm.
and we come with a whole new solution that would have been impossible to solve, let's say with, I mean, because if you go out and buy a CRM, it's a CRM. It's not going to solve some of your other business related problems, right?
Yeah.
That's what it is. But if you have a team of people, those people aren't CRM people, necessarily. And even if they are, it doesn't mean their expertise isn't going to apply in other areas that could bring insight. And so having the kind of that weapon that you can point at whatever problem arises, I think was a huge advantage to this company. Um,
Yeah.
but it's an expensive one. It's not one that everyone can or should afford, and it just really depends on your strategy. And part of our company's strategy was to try to leverage technology to gain a competitive advantage over our competitors. And I think to a large extent, that's what we achieved for many, many years.
Well, and this podcast is generally not about like innovation processes and stuff, but it comes up a lot in our conversations. And one of the things, and again, a lot of listeners may be more expert in this than I am, but the way a lot of this is done today is you say, you're making a checklist of all of your internal expertise, right? And you're saying, where can we really hit the gas? Like, what can we do? Like, what can we really do with what we've already got? What do we need to bring in? What's here, right? How do we get to the next level? And one of the things that often comes up is that there are neglected areas in a business. They don't realize or think about how much value is in a particular team and what they do. And this is the perfect case for it, right? You have this team with tremendous value that's already done, X, Y, and Z. And if you actually go to them and say, okay, here's something we want to do as a business, go think about it. That team will start coming back with extraordinary ideas that you probably wouldn't have thought of at first that can save money and make money.
Yeah. I could give a really cool example. Like one of the issues that we ran into was we would get just for the size that we would get returns, and then those returns, as well as damaged product or whatever else, would just end up stacking up.
Sure.
And we, for a long time, just never really had much of an outlet for that. And so it was starting to take up a significant portion of the warehouse. We had some excess inventory issues where a product that maybe didn't sell as well as we'd hoped. And so, we just got together. Well, what do we need to do? And they had tried a few things. They'd made a few deals that had, gotten rid of some of that inventory.
Mm-hmm.
But we decided internally, hey, well, what if we actually did like some warehouse sales in some of the communities where our warehouses were?
There you go.
And so we decided to do that. But obviously we have to take credit card payments and we got to do all that kind of stuff. Well, guess what? Our software team had experience doing that. We did it on the web.
Mm-hmm.
We'd done some local stuff. So it's like we had some experience. We're like, well, what would it take to build basically a really, really simple point of sale system? We already have all of our product data, all of our barcode data. So they could scan the product in our warehouse. We could pull up the pricing, So we basically, in a 2-week period, built a really simple point of sale system, and it worked on our little handheld scanners. Some of them actually that we had purchased, luckily enough, we didn't plan this. We just were fortunate, had credit card readers on them.
Mm-hmm.
And so
that's great.
In a matter of a couple of weeks, we basically built a POS system, a custom one for our warehouse sales. And it was based on handhelds that they would use in our warehouse as scanners. And the cool thing about that is we could dynamically change like our checkout lines and how many checkout stations we had based on the volume of people coming through. And, we got it to the point where I think we did like $1.5 million in sales in a 2-day event.
Well,
just to get rid of excess inventory. And it's like we came up with it in 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And it really just came from us meeting and saying, hey, we got this excess inventory problem. Well, what are some ideas? Warehouse sale got brought up. We're like, sure. And then they asked us, well, could we do something there? Instead of going out and buying a solution and paying money and that kind of stuff, we're going to have a team that can pull that off for you.
It's so good that you did that, and I'm glad you brought it up, because for some of the roles that I had years ago were in an industrial park that's not too far from my house. It's actually the second largest industrial park in the country. It has hundreds and hundreds of small manufacturers. It's pretty remarkable. Well, what happened over time is that most of these manufacturers actually developed stores, in their locations, and they weren't always running like 9 to 5 days a week or whatever. They ran whenever they needed to run, but it's really a similar concept. I mean, I was head of marketing for a health and wellness manufacturer. They made a lot of vitamin supplements, did them private label for a bunch of companies, had their own brands, big mix. they set up their own store for things that were like, things that might be getting close to expiration, they didn't want to ship out, or things that were whatever the story was, or returns that were still saleable, so you didn't have to do anything else with them. It was very successful, and most of those businesses learned that. There was a LED lighting company I worked for that did that. There was I'll mention Walkers, if people know Walkers, for the little biscuits. It's like a Scottish company, I think. Uh,
Yeah.
they had their manufacturing plant in the US is just a few miles from my house. They have a store, and
Yeah.
they'll send emails saying warehouse sale, warehouse sale.
Yep.
And it's
Yeah.
fantastic. People need
Yep.
to think like that if they haven't already. They really do.
Yep. I mean, I don't know that I want to say it's a game changer, but it was a big deal for us. I mean, it even became so valuable in the areas that uh, were very successful with the warehouse sale. It ended up being worth trucking in from some of our other warehouse locations that didn't have, a large enough community to kind of support that kind of a sale. Because we had an enormous amount of product. So
Mhm.
if you have a town of 20,000 people where one of your distribution centers, it's probably not going to absorb that.
Sure, I understand. I understand.
So we would even ship that stuff into some of our larger locations, and it was worth it to us to do that, to be able to get rid of that excess inventory.
So, could you tell me a little bit about B2C versus B2B? Like what was happening wholesale? Did they have their own direct to consumer? All of these different things. I mean, let me in on that.
Yeah, I mean, this company, we didn't do a whole lot of direct to consumers. We had websites we'd sell direct to consumers, but that was a pretty small percentage of our business.
Mhm.
But we did sell to, we did list on Amazon.
Sure.
Eventually that was forced into a retail situation so that we would sell to Amazon, and we pretty much sold to all the big players: Walmart, Wayfair, uh, I don't know. I mean, even Home Depot and Lowe's, we would sell beds to.
Sure.
Um, Pretty much anybody. So, I mean, those are kind of business to business relationships because we're not necessarily selling directly to consumer. These would be large pallet orders that we're shipping out to them. But then we did have what we called our wholesale business that was to basically either smaller chains or even mom and pop stores. And
Hmm.
we would, your local mattress store, we would sell mattresses to them, and they would buy them from us. We'd ship them out to them.
Is there
And
a
so we
local
did.
mattress store anymore? I mean, that's a funny thought today.
There's, yeah, I mean,
I
there
haven't
aren't a
seen one in
lot.
years.
Yeah, there aren't a lot.
Yeah.
There, yeah, yeah. I think they've kind of disappeared. Yeah, especially now that you can buy like boxed mattresses online. I think that's
It's like saying
changed things
local
quite a
shoe
bit.
store. It's like saying local
Yeah,
shoe store, local watch store.
yeah,
I know it's kind of, I shouldn't be smiling so much, but it feels
yeah.
nostalgia now when people talk
A
about
little bit.
that.
Yeah, definitely for sure. There definitely aren't as many. I think there's actually quite, and it depends on the part of the country you're in.
Hmm.
But we would sell to those as well as chains. I think we sold a lot to Mattress Firm and
Sure.
any of the big ones. But yeah, I mean, when we first started out, I mean, there's a few key components. One is like we did all that business over phone and email when I started working
Hmm.
for this company, and people would email in their orders, and they would manually put it into the ERP system, and they would manually ship it, and that's how things started. And eventually, though, we built basically a wholesale. We called it the Wholesale Resource Center, but basically, it's where our dealers could log in. They could see their account balance.
Hmm.
Some of them would have a credit line with us,
Sure.
and they could see their invoices. They could pay their invoices. They could um, do all of that kind of stuff, basically. And it
Oh,
was set up to
a
where,
portal.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And it
Hmm.
was set up, it would take into account their price list. So
Hmm.
every customer could, I mean, in our system, every customer could have their own price list if you wanted to go that crazy. Obviously, that gets really cumbersome if you have, 100,000 individual customers with their own price list. So generally that got standardized into some main price lists, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does. I always make a case for tiered pricing on this podcast
Yep,
because I am, after working with so many people who had one price for every customer, I will no longer put up with it when I go in and work with them. I'm like, no, there are other options,
yep,
and they
yep,
they automatically think that they initially think, I should say, that they are going to make less money. And then what always happens is that they move over these systems and they actually make more money because it
yeah, I believe
feels
that.
more fair and everything's kind of evened out in tiers and you want to get to the next tier. And it's basically
Yep,
more of like a loyalty program kind of competition in a way where people
yep,
want to get up to the next level as opposed to having the secret price that no one else knows.
yep, yep, yep. And yeah, I mean, for sure, like standardizing pricing. The advantage again of having your own development team is we would build into the software a lot of this stuff. So like rules based on price. So if you buy X number of dollars, your freight's free or half off. Our order entry system knew all of this stuff and could handle all of that. But yeah, we built that out into what we call the wholesale resource center portal, as you mentioned. And initially, I think, it started out pretty slow. I think when we first launched it, we'd have like 15 to 20% of our our dealers would actually log in through there and actually, um, purchase there versus phone or email or
Mhm.
something like that. But and it took us a few years, and we did incentivize it at some point where you'd get a discount basically if you use the portal. Because for us, it reduces errors. Um, we don't have to do any manual entry, so it reduces the time on from like an office clerk who's keying in those orders. You don't have to do that anymore. We even built some tools where because a lot of our customers, they just wanted to be able to export, because part of the issue is they would have their own system, maybe even QuickBooks or something, and they would just export their invoice or their purchase order in as PDF and send it over to them, and that's why they would email it in. That was just easy for them.
Yep.
So we even built a system where they could upload that PDF, and we could actually from the PDF create an order in our system. So for them, it was still just as easy. Instead of emailing it, now I just upload it into the portal and it creates my order for me.
Were
And
people still faxing when you started with this company?
yes,
Yes, that is
yes,
my experience as well. People were faxing.
yep, yep. Faxing was a thing. I think we did something similar where we would get those faxes in as emails, and we built a little system that would it could read those emails that came in, the PDFs that were attached, and it would create an order from them. So we tried to automate
It's
as much
funny.
as we could.
It's funny how how far we've come, but also how recent that all was that people were still
Yeah,
doing that. I mean, I had an eFax account that turned faxes into emails. I
yeah,
had that, and just like I remember how many people used to take advantage of it too. It was
oh yeah,
really surprising. Even though they could have
yeah,
emailed at that point, they still faxed and it turned
yep,
into an email. Like, oh,
yeah, exactly. It's kind of roundabout.
yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. To me, as kind of a software developer, it was always what people still use faxes. It's kind of crazy to me, but yeah, it was a lot of that, and um, yeah, I think towards the end we had a greater than a 90% adoption rate of our portal. So
Excellent.
I think it got up there, but it took some time. It's not something that just happened immediately. Um, it took a lot of effort to try to get, and I think, granted, we probably started that 7 years ago,
Sure.
and so nowadays maybe you get a little faster adoption. I don't know. a lot just depends on who you're selling to, and if they're used to using a fax machine, it's hard to get them to change, man. It's just so hard.
Well, I mean, some of the things that we've talked about in the podcast with other guests, it's interesting because it has gotten easier, to make a lot of these changes, and things are happening more quickly. And salespeople used to be kind of a roadblock, but they're not. They're not anymore because most companies have figured out how to make the case to salespeople. Salespeople have been involved in the processes. They're incentivizing their, customers, their clients to do the right thing, to digitize so that they're not wasting time as a salesperson with like repeat orders or any of these sorts of things. They're working on the bigger things that need human touch still, right? So it's kind
Yep.
of it's really evolved in the last few years. I'd say even until I'd say 5 years ago, maybe, maybe four, just before COVID, it was still pretty rough at times.
Yep.
But
Yep.
now, not so much. You can make that case really quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you can make the case quickly. I also think you know, I think there's still a ton of business that haven't really digitized and don't necessarily have a portal. And that's kind of what we work with some of those businesses now, and we're trying to get them set up. But I think, if you have a software system, I mean, it becomes second nature because those salespeople don't necessarily want to get the emails. They want to know when their customers are putting in orders,
Mm-hmm.
and they may want to call them and they may want to upsell them. But if they have a system in place that does that, then I mean, it's way easier for them, and they see the advantage to that as well because and two, your customer service can increase pretty substantially. A lot of what I work on now is similar to what I was doing for this company. We're helping these companies automate,
Mm-hmm.
and if you get an order in electronically from a dealer portal, I mean, we can do a lot to automate that order so that it's ready to ship pretty much instantly. Um, and so um, there's so many advantages to it. I think that your really great salespeople get on board pretty quick. It's like, wait a second, like, so I don't have to touch anything, but yet I can still know that this is happening. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And we still get our traditional customers. They're like, well, initially a lot of times they're like, I still want to see and touch every order that comes through the system. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing if you have the time for it. Um, but if you're going to scale, at some point that becomes really difficult, or you end up hiring a lot of salespeople. And what you really want to know is, well, when do I need to look at that? And we can create flags inside of a system that kind of indicate to them like, hey, yeah, you should look at this order. Maybe there is an opportunity to upsell. And we often work with salespeople to figure out what are those triggers, what are those things that they want to see. And so usually anymore, once they understand how something like that can work, they get on board pretty fast.
The triggers that I've seen for like as folks I've worked with call it high touch, right? Things that need to be high touch are custom, right? A lot of customizations, things that are like I was working with somebody that makes custom furniture, so you could either buy the stuff that just exists, like here's the catalog of it, or they make these highly customized solutions, not just like change the upholstery color, but completely different configurations for offices or hotels or restaurants, or whatever. It can be very complex, and you can't mess it up because these things it's often like booths in a restaurant. They have to fit in exactly into
Yep.
the architecture, right? So those kinds of things, it's still recommended to have like humans involved, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have a human involved at some point in that process, everything's going to be 1 inch off and get returned and be a disaster, right? So it's just kind of,
Yep.
that is kind of the example that I often give. But a lot of things don't need that, right? They don't. You
Yeah.
get
No.
you get notifications, you say, yep, that's it, and off you go, and you're moving on to something else. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the biggest other one is I see businesses, they want the opportunity to upsell their customers and look at their account and say, well, I see that you've ordered, like, for instance, you're ordering our mattresses, you're ordering our toppers, you're maybe ordering our protectors, but you don't order any of our sheets. I want to know that and find out, well, why don't you buy sheets from us?
Mm-hmm.
And see if I can get you set up as a sheet account as well. That we can see those things, and we can kind of highlight, hey, these are the product categories that this customer's buying from. Here's ones that maybe they're not. And, we can generate lists for our customers on those things to kind of help them in that process, if that makes sense.
It does, and one thing though that I've seen, and see, I don't know if you agree with this. It'll be kind of interesting. One of the things I've seen is that a lot of customers today, especially, let's say, I'm going to say 18 to 44. I'll give you an age range. The younger range of customers, since they're so familiar with the digital world and ordering things online and whatever, sometimes those customers in B2B or any wholesale relationship, they want to get like a digital notification or an email saying, hey, you're not buying our sheets. What do you think if, and would you like to be contacted, as opposed to being contacted? And
Yeah.
if they're older, they may be more familiar with saying, okay, I'll get a phone call or like a message saying we're setting up a meeting. But mostly younger people, they just want that reminder, maybe, or
Yeah.
some special promo or some encouragement, and then they're fine. They still don't need a human touch. They just need
Yeah.
that built in.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably absolutely true. I don't consider myself, I'm a technologist. I don't necessarily consider myself an expert when it comes to the sales process and that kind of stuff. I usually lean, especially when we work with companies on their software, I lean pretty heavily on their sales team, and they tell me what it is they want.
Sure, sure, that's good.
And I have some experience with it, but I wouldn't say that I'm a sales expert by any means.
Well, I think what's interesting is that I've gone in and done like corporate training classes of various sorts over the years because I'm that old timer, right? I always joke about
Yeah.
that. I've been doing so many things for so long, and just I can come in and say, here's another way to look at it, right? One of the things that's fascinating is that, again, when you bring, let's say, technologists into a room, everybody in that room has their mobile phone, right? And
Yeah.
everybody has, been on social media. Everybody has
Mhm.
made an e-commerce purchase, even if it's once in a while from Walmart and Amazon, right? If you go through that list, everybody's been a consumer and has opinions on how they like to interact, with a brand online, right? And
Yeah.
so what happens is if you start weaving in that and just hearing those opinions often enough, then they're kind of looking at whatever they're being asked to do in a little bit differently. And they could raise their hand to the sales team and say, well, that's not how I shop. I
Yep.
should do this. And
Yep.
then it becomes fascinating. I mean, I was in a company recently, it's over $1 billion in sales a year, B2B worldwide, really interesting business. And they have a process like that in place where they're actually bringing in teams periodically to say, how would you, buy this product, or how would you like to
Yeah.
be presented this? And it's fascinating to hear the results from it. It's really great.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I believe that. I mean, uh, I think the key is like, I think, people tend to have their own biases. And I think the more that you could bring in to kind of dispel your own biases is the better. I mean, maybe it ends up confirming what you thought,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
I think the more people you talk to try to get an idea of what the consumer wants, the better. I remember when we were a small company, the CEO would often, because he would be involved in product development discussions. There was just a small group of us.
Sure.
So he would be asking me, well, what do you think about this mattress or this bed frame? And I'm like, I just build websites, man. I don't. But he was genuinely interested because, the more opinions you could get, even from his own team, because it's not like I didn't have an opinion. I certainly did. And so he was really a master at just collecting those opinions, and he would value them all. I wouldn't necessarily say equally, but every opinion, at least you certainly felt like your opinion was valued and thought about whether it was valid or not,
Well, I'll just make one more pitch for this, because I totally believe there is value to that process, right? I'm a huge believer. There's an apparel manufacturer I also worked with a while ago. They're huge. I mean, they are really, I think they're the second or third largest behind the scenes manufacturer in the world. Like, they make clothes for, Polo and Lacoste, and, just like big brands,
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
different pieces of apparel, mostly menswear. They make mostly menswear. So, what they do, which is not surprising when you think about it, is they'll talk to the men in the business, since they're making menswear, and say, well, here's something, we're thinking of selling. Here's a new fabric. What do you think of it? And they send samples out to all their employees to see what the fabric is like. They'll do stuff like that. It's actually great, because you don't have to just go to a different type of end consumer. I mean, I'm wearing a shirt. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean it doesn't matter if I'm a manufacturer or not. I have opinions about the shirt that I wear. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So everyone has to kind of break those walls down once in a while to just value the process and see what comes out of it. And
Yeah.
I'm all for it.
Yeah, I would agree. I think opinions you maybe don't think, on the surface, maybe that person doesn't have any expertise. They don't need to know how a shirt's made.
No, they don't.
To
They
have an
don't. They
opinion about
wear
it.
it.
Yeah,
They
they don't
wear
really need to. Yeah, they don't really need to know much about it.
it.
So
Exactly.
yeah, I think you can ask opinions of just about anyone, and there's at least some validity to it all.
So let me shift gears, because we're probably in the final, almost 10 minutes, I guess, of our time. So tell me, and feel free, tell me a little bit about what you're up to now. And then, then we can take it from there. But I was going to ask a little bit about that, and then maybe just some of your views about where B2B e-commerce is going in particular. I like asking
Sure.
that question just to see what people are thinking. But tell us a little bit about what you're up to right now.
Yeah. So I mean, I'll tell you a little bit about how I got to where I am now,
Sure.
and then kind of what we're doing. So um, I left that company that I worked for 10 years, probably about a year ago. And before that, I had kind of pitched the idea that, hey guys, like, we have actually some pretty great software. There's a lot of companies that could benefit from this. What do you think if we were to sell it? And I think mostly they humored me.
Yeah.
And so they kind of let me take that on. So I kind of gave up the reins of managing the software development team there, and I moved over and started to create a team around the idea that we were going to take the software we built and sell it. And that lasted for about a year, and then said company kind of hit some financial issues. Nothing too crazy, but I don't think they wanted to humor me much anymore.
It happens. Yeah.
So, they wanted me to come back and just work for them still, but kind of back to what I was doing a little bit. And I had kind of gotten the bug, I think. And I had wanted to do this for a long time. And so, we had gotten some clients, and so I kind of asked, I was just like, well, what if I was to go strike out on my own? Obviously I can't use their software. But what if I struck out on my own, and would you let me take these clients that we have? And they allowed me to do that. So about a year ago, I left, and basically started building with a handful of customers, basically a new software system that basically did a lot of what the one at my previous employer did. Now, it's not as expansive as that was, because that did an enormous number of things and had a large team to support it. And this one's a little more niche. So our primary thing right now, and I'm sure over time it will expand, but it integrates with QuickBooks. And it's pretty seamless. It gets up and going very fast, because we can just, if you have QuickBooks, it could just pull all the data for QuickBooks. We have your items, we have your customers,
Sure.
we have everything we need to basically generate an order. So what we do a lot for a lot of companies is, they sell on Amazon, or maybe they sell on a few different marketplaces, maybe Shopify or their own website on eCommerce or whatever, at some D2C portal that they have. So a lot of what we do is we have integrations into all those places, and we'll pull in orders and we'll put them into QuickBooks for them. Now, our system is built so that it has an interface. You could go put orders in through there instead of QuickBooks. And there's some advantage to that, in the sense that it works on, it'll work on mobile. It's web-based. So it's a cloud platform. So it's a website. You could do it from your house. You don't have to be there local. And so we do all of that kind of stuff. We'll automatically get their orders in. We automate a lot of the order fulfillment process. We do warehousing. So we have a scanning system. We'll do inventory management. As companies grow and they've been on QuickBooks, at a certain point, kind of the way QuickBooks manages inventory kind of starts to break down.
Yeah.
And there's a few instances that I could highlight. Like, one of them would be, we see this a lot, where they have customers that maybe order $10,000 of their product, and they're going to ship it out to them on pallets. Well, they want to charge that customer before they go ship it, to make sure that they can get their money. But what they end up doing is they generate an invoice inside of QuickBooks, and then they pay the invoice. And well, what does that do? Well, it actually takes it out of inventory, but you still have it out in your warehouse physically. So you end up with a little issue where, well, if you went and counted what you have out there, it's different than what's reflected in QuickBooks. It's still accurate. It's not that it's inaccurate, because you are going to ship that stuff.
Just different.
But actually, yeah, it's just different. And so the issue is if you go and count it, it makes it really difficult to kind of correct your inventory if there's issues with it, because you have to account for all these that are kind of in-flight invoices, if that makes sense. And so our software solves all that problem. We have it has a scanning solution, so we track the inventory as it moves physically. So when an order comes in, you're going to generate a pick list on the scanner. It's going to route you through the warehouse. If you have bins, if you have a simpler setup than that, it can kind of scale down and do something more simple. But when we support big setups too, we can have multiple warehouses, that kind of a thing. But you'll go and you'll pick your items on your pick list. Maybe you'll take them to a packing area, and you'll pack them and print your shipping labels. But the inventory comes out, out of a bin when you scan it onto an order. And so we can kind of track the inventory much more accurately. And then what we can do is kind of do that reconciliation with the inventory in QuickBooks for you. Another thing we run into is there's a lot of businesses that they want to get past QuickBooks. Maybe they're ready to go to a NetSuite, or maybe they're ready to go to an Acumatica, which is just a little more modern and in the cloud. We kind of sometimes fill the gap in between. And because, sometimes they want to have a website, they want to sell on Amazon, they want to do all of those things, but QuickBooks is kind of in the way, especially that QuickBooks desktop, because it's hard to have all those places know what your inventory is and all that kind of stuff. Well, our software solves that problem. And then if you do decide to transition to NetSuite or anything like that, we can kind of aid in that process, where we can take your information out of QuickBooks, we can help get it into a NetSuite or into Acumatica or whatever it happens to be. And, you know, even if we don't have an existing integration, that's kind of our bread and butter, is we'll integrate with anything. We're really, really good at that. And that's kind of more or less our system.
That's great. So what's the name of your business? I want to make sure our listeners get to hear it. I want to make sure they hear it.
So the funny thing is we don't have a lot of marketing materials until
That's okay.
Probably a couple of months ago. It was known as, and it's something my lawyer came up with when he created the business, known as Obray Business Venture.
Oh yeah, that's not good. Yeah,
which is pretty terrible.
Yeah.
So,
Don't ever let a lawyer do your branding.
Yeah.
Don't ever.
So we've started working on that piece of the puzzle. And so we've been calling our software Orca, and our website is killerwarehouse.com. It literally has nothing on it right now.
I work with 2 other companies with the name Orca, so like.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I know. Good luck with that. So I really do wish you the best with this. And people could find you through what website? I mean, what website, or LinkedIn? How do they find you?
Yeah, you can find me, Nate Obray, on LinkedIn. You can email me at nate@killerwarehouse.com. You can go to our website, killerwarehouse.com. I'll put some contact info on there.
That's great. That's great. I just want to make sure, you know, you never know.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, most of our work has been word of mouth. Obviously, we're not huge. We're pretty small. There's advantages and disadvantages to that too. The advantage is we're usually willing to bend over backwards for our customers. Every customer to us right now is really important. The disadvantage, we're just small. So we are well funded. We have some investors.
That's good.
So
this is excellent. And congratulations.
Things are going well.
That's good.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So one last question, you know, just anything that comes to mind kind of about what you see on the horizon for B2B e-commerce in particular. I mean, there have been a lot of changes in recent years, a lot of shifts, you know, composable, which we talked about earlier. I mean, is there anything that you see that you want to just throw out there for our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I don't know exactly maybe where the question, what you're getting after with the question, but I think
run with it.
I'll just run with it.
Yeah,
so I think there's 2 angles I'd take. I think for sure, which is probably really obvious and probably something that I think is pretty obvious to most people, that is that all business to business has to have some online component.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have that, you got to get it somehow, some way.
Yep.
People, I think you talked about it earlier, the younger generation, if you don't have a website they can log in and look at your product and buy it's not going to make sense to them, and they're much more likely to go with a company that does.
Yep.
And so I think that you got to get online if you're not there, and most people these days, they're online in some fashion, but you really got to refine that and make that work with your business. And if that means, you know, changing up some of your back end systems or that kind of stuff, it's time to start looking at that. And then I think too, you know, if I was to just look at it from a software perspective, I do think there's some change where, you know, a lot of companies aren't going with kind of the traditional larger ERP systems that are out there. I think some of these younger ones that are kind of moving into that space are finding alternatives, and a lot of that's because it's very expensive and it's kind of slow to kind of maneuver to their needs, if that makes sense. And so I don't know, I see there is some areas of innovation happening where, you know, other solutions are coming into play that these companies are leveraging that are a little less traditional than these massive ERP all-in-one kind of monolithic software suites that kind of run your business. And I'm kind of excited to see maybe what some of that, what happens there. Certainly not every business is that way. If you have a very traditional business, and you probably want to go with something that is proven. But I've seen a number of younger, maybe a little more innovative companies that are trying new things, and I don't know. I think it's exciting to look at what that might look like.
I think it's exciting too. I mean, that's one of the reasons we started this podcast a few years ago, and one of the reasons it keeps going is that there's a lot of innovation, there's a lot of change, there's a lot more to do. I think that's another way to look at it too. There's a lot more still to do. So, Nate, I want to thank you for being our guest on episode 107 of the Hard Truth About B2B E-commerce. I'm sorry that Isaiah, my co-host, couldn't be here today. I apologize to all our listeners, but I hope I was good enough. I hope I was okay. So I'm gonna end it here and wish you the best for everything that you do. And then episode 108 comes out a week after that.